Yes, I know. And that's a good reason to not be here.
So can I ask you a question?
Certainly.
I said this to my friend last night. They told me that their child, no, actually grandchild, went to a, that's what they were at. And there was no ceremony. They just had a party. I said, I've never heard of that before. Huh?
I have not either. And our bar, our idea of what bar and bat mitzvah is has become more watered down and more watered down over the years, and it's really a shame. It's a shame. It's all about the party, and it's not about what this means to the child.
I know
You
that.
know, how big is the party going to be? How many people are going to come? What kind of food? Where's it going to be? And it's like, no, 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 no. That's not it.
But you have a party without an actual service.
That's terrible.
Huh?
That's terrible.
Esther is all right, she's home, but she had a stroke.
Esther? She's at home. But how long is she?
Not the first one. I'm really good
She calls.
I'm bringing, I'm bringing. I don't think we should go over, but
It's not easy to get over, because I saw it with my parents, you know, huh?
you're still here.
Huh?
I don't mind this, I don't mind it, I don't even mind the arthritis much, but Gary is awful.
Next time. Fine. I'll probably get it wrong. No idea.
You won't be the only one.
Was that tree designated for items? Because that's what Asherah was. She was God's consort. sorry, I can't hear.
You never add a varietal, Joey,
We never,
add a varietal. Say toddlers, not, maybe a smaller, which is okay, she's gonna have to. Okay, she's gonna add it. Okay.
because, well, yes, okay, fair enough. I will go with you.
Live period is watered down.
Say again?
Everything in life, you've heard about the great inflation. The great inflation.
Yes, yeah, oh, yeah.
You know,
And the state of our education is, you know, the children,
what can you say?
it's quite bad.
I'm an and Joel was an educator, so I don't
It's
know.
quite bad. I mean, everyone,
teaching for
everyone expects an A for everything. And it's like, I'm sorry, you have to do A work to get an A. And A work is not easy. A is excellent. B is good. And you know, in our society, somehow B became terrible. And it's like, B is good. It's good work. B is good work. C is average.
You know what?
You know, I had in high school, I was crazy. If I didn't get an A, I went nuts. And I graduated with a 3.9999, you know, cum laude, the whole thing.
Today it would be a 4.60.
Yeah, maybe. And I got my first B in grad school. And by then, though, I had calmed down. I said, B, cool. I'm great with a B. No problem.
The reason it's a varietal, we always say a mid-rush this. We learn in a mid-rush, and then the top we learn a varietal. We always seem to leave it out, but we
Because a
quote it all
variety
the
is a
time.
Mishnah that just didn't make it into the
Right, I
Mishnah.
know, but we never seem to include it. I
Okay,
feel
I
bad.
guess because I included kind of sort of with Mishnah.
Yeah,
But
that makes sense.
it's okay.
It's like, we never agree, well, we have Shammai agree like 18 times we agree with Shammai. I feel bad for the guy. You know, he's gonna be right, everybody's right once in a while.
Okay, fair
Even
enough.
teachers are right once in a while. Because right now I'm teaching first graders and once in a while I get the answers right.
Yes. Good morning, Susie. You'll let me know when I can start? You got to get set up, right? I'm sorry? Go ahead. Oh, okay. Yes, sir. Yes. So you better study. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. Okay. on this beautiful rainy morning when we get some nice water for all of our plants, the ducks are very happy today. It's great weather for ducks. Okay, so I want to review for 5 minutes what we did last week because some of you were not here last week. And I just want to review the major point that I made last week. There was a whole lot of information, but it will get reviewed as we go through all the other stuff as well. Okay. My major point from last week is we are beginning now to study Jewish theology, which means we are beginning to look at questions about God and everything that pertains to God. Now, what I told you last week is that unlike some other religious systems, Judaism gives you choices on what you want to believe. What I mean by that is Jewish theology is in many respects like a buffet table. And I pointed out last week, okay, here we have the kosher table, and here we have the treifa table. And when we talk about all of these issues about God, mitzvot, the chosen people, etc., 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 you can choose anything you want from that table. and it will be authentically Jewish. There are a number of ideas that Judaism has about God, and the mitzvot, and the chosen people, and what happens after we die, etc., etc. And you can choose from that table. You can also choose from that table. I'm not going to judge you. But if you choose from that table, know that it's not a Jewish idea. It is some other idea that you have chosen to believe, and that is your right as a human being to believe whatever you want to believe. The only thing is, I'll just tell you, that's not authentically Jewish. So we talked last week about the idea, which is associated most often with Christianity. What is God? God is love. You'll hear that a lot in Christianity. God is love. And the idea in Christianity, the essence of God, we can't say is love, but there's a lot of love in God for Christians. That is not at all a Jewish idea. In Judaism, God can show great love when God wants to. God can also be very harsh and very punishing and sometimes very impatient. So that's not a Jewish idea. If you want to say that, you can believe that if you want to. But I will just tell you, that's that table. That's not the kosher table. How do we know what's on the kosher table? Good question. If we find the idea in one of our authoritative texts, then it's on the kosher table. If we find the idea that we are going to talk about in the Tanakh, if we find it in the Talmud, and remember the Talmud is made up of what? The Mishnah plus the Gemara. And the Braitot are in there as well. A Baraita, for those of you who don't know, is a Mishnah that didn't make it into the Mishnah. So Judah HaNasi codifies the Mishnah around 200 CE. And there are some laws that, they're good laws, they just didn't make it into the Mishnah. So if we want to cite a proof text, we can cite a Baraita, but it's not in the Talmud anywhere. Okay. If we find it in the Midrash, it is an authentic Jewish idea, and it is on the kosher table. Now remember, the rabbis, what is the Midrash? Good, stories, good. They are imaginative narratives from the rabbis to fill in missing information in our tradition. So we don't know how Abraham decides there's only one God, or that God is God and there aren't others, and our God is the most powerful. So we all know the beautiful midrash about Abraham coming in. He finds the idols that his father Terach is making. One of them is larger than the other ones. He smashes all the little idols. Terach comes home. What the heck happened here? Oh, the big idol. He smashed all the little ones. And Terach is like, what are you talking about? It's just a piece of stone. It can't do anything. Abraham, aha! Aha! See? It's just a piece of stone. That's Midrash. So the rabbis come in and save us with a beautiful story about how Abraham decided that God is God. Okay. As well as the Kabbalah. The Kabbalah is authoritative in our tradition. If we find a particular idea in the Zohar and the other mystical texts, the Zohar is probably at the top of the mystical texts, but there are other mystical texts as well. If we find it in there, then it is authoritative. Now, if you are not a Kabbalist, you don't have to choose from the Kabbalah. You could choose from one of the ideas from Midrash or Talmud or Tanakh. That's the beauty of our system. As we go through this week by week by week, I'm going to present you with different options. All the options that I am presenting to you are from that table. So, you can choose from that table, or as I said, I'm not going to judge you if you choose from the other table. If you believe when we die, we become a star and we shine brightly in the heavens, you are entitled to believe whatever you believe. I will tell you it's not an authentic Jewish belief, but you can believe what you want to believe. It's my job here to present some guidelines so that you know within which territory you can believe. Okay, great. So I want to talk about, yes. I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Oh,
So you showed a timeline last week to show how we've adopted traditions from different places where we've been.
Right.
And I was wondering, I don't remember seeing Egypt. Did we pick up anything from our sojourn in Egypt?
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful question. Okay, so a part of what I just left out for those of you who weren't here last week, I went through Jewish history and told you that in each era of Jewish history, we co-opted certain ideas from the conquering populations. So, from the Babylonians, the Babylonian exiles brought ideas about dualism from Zoroastrianism that became our ideas of angels and demons in the Apocrypha and in the Second Temple period. The Greeks brought us ideas, philosophical ideas, especially when we get to it, the disembodied soul from Plato. And in each successive conquering civilization, we co-opted ideas from that civilization. And that would make sense, right? Somebody conquers us. Their ideas are all over the place because they've conquered us. And so we're going to look at that and say, oh, that's kind of cool. All right, I like that. I hadn't experienced that before. I didn't know about that. So the question that Judy just asked me is, what about Egypt? I didn't mention Egypt last week. Did we take anything from Egypt? We absolutely took ideas from Egypt, from being enslaved in Egypt as Hebrews before we become a people. Chief among those, the Egyptians had ideas about angels too, with wings. Some of our iconography it resembles Egyptian iconography as well. We took ideas about the afterlife, right? The resurrection of the dead. If you think about it, Israel, if you picture Israel, to Israel's west, southwest is Egypt. To Israel's east is Babylon. So we had Zoroastrianism on the right-hand side with ideas about resurrection of the dead, and we had ideas from Egypt on the left down side about resurrection of the dead. The pharaohs were buried with all their accoutrements. Why? Because they were going to live again in the afterworld, and they needed all of their stuff. They needed their boats, they needed their weapons. Okay. So these were ideas, certainly, that we took from Egypt as well. And for some Jews, ideas about idols, I mean, our episode with the golden calf, right? Our text is kind of unclear about who actually builds the golden calf. It says Aaron went around, he asked all the people for gold. The Midrash says the men gave them the gold, the women said, oh, hell no. And because they were more faithful. And what did the women get rewarded with for that? Rosh Chodesh. They got rewarded with a holiday once a month because of their fidelity to God during the golden calf incident. But so we know that Aaron goes around. So Aaron's involved, and it implies that the people are involved. But if you ask the rabbis say, no, it was the mixed multitude. They did it. Because remember, the Hebrew slaves come out of Egypt, and whom do they come out with? They come out with a whole bunch of other people. They come out with some Egyptians, they come out with some slaves from other countries, they come out with like the rabble of other places. And they all go out. And so the rabbis say, those are the ones who did it. They are the ones who built the golden calf. Our text implicates the Israelites. Shall I say that? But the rabbis want to make it, no. It was mostly the mixed multitude. They had more influence. I always wonder if they were slaves, where did they get the gold? Remember, they left Egypt with a whole lot of money. They left Egypt with a whole lot of gold and money. Remember that the Israelites leave Egypt and they go to the Egyptians. And they say, how about some of the stuff that you got? And the Egyptians, depending on which rabbi commentaries you read, the Egyptians either willingly hand over everything. Oh, we were terrible to you for the last 350 years. Here, take our gold, take our silver, take whatever. We were terrible to you. Or the Israelites just took it. It's unclear how they get all of this gold. My personal feeling, this is just Rabbi Mark thinking, is that the Egyptians, by that point, after all of the plagues and everything, were just so happy to see these people out. They're like, fine, take it, go, get out of here. I don't want to see you anymore. Take whatever you want. I don't care. Just get out of here. I don't want any more plagues. My oldest son just died. Get out of here. I think that's what happened. But that's just me. I always like the dramatic one because I think that's how we are. I think that's what happened. Okay, so, Judy, does that help? Okay, so let's talk about God, my favorite subject. Okay, so we're gonna talk about God today and next week, and we're gonna start with ideas about how God works in the world. And in our tradition, Jewish tradition, there are two major ideas about God. The first idea is that God is a transcendent God. Transcendent means that God is very far away and God is unknowable. So, in our tradition, when something bad happens, and our answer is, well, we don't know God's plan. We just have to trust that God has us in his thoughts and everything's fine. We don't know God's plan. That's a transcendent God. The other idea about God is that God is what we call immanent. Not imminent like this is going to happen imminently in next week or whatever. Immanent, which means that God is close by and that we can access God through our prayers, in Kabbalah, through various mystical practices, that God is close by. And these two ideas have existed throughout Jewish history, and have been looked at differently by various groups of Jews over the course of history. So, you have heard the word Shekhinah, right? Shekhinah takes a special meaning when we get to the Kabbalah. This is not the Shekhinah of the Kabbalah. Shekhinah in the early periods before the Kabbalah comes into existence simply means God's presence around us. That would be an immanent God, a God who is with us, that we can talk to individually, and God will listen to our prayer. You will recall in the biblical times, how did we access God? Just say it. Through the prophets. Yes, that's kind of true, yes. Through the sacrificial system. So our earliest understanding of how we access God, which was not unlike the surrounding populations, right? This wasn't an Israelite invention. This was, oh, everyone else is doing this. I guess this is how you get to God. We're through the sacrifices. And the sacrifices, in Hebrew, the word is korban. That's a sacrifice. Plural, korbanot, the sacrifices. And what would happen when we did the sacrifices? The people would bring an animal, and the priests would sacrifice the animal would burn, there would be smoke. And over 40 times in the Bible, you hear the Hebrew term, reach nechoach. Reach nechoach is usually translated as a pleasing aroma, a pleasing smell. And so the human understanding is that the sacrifices would be made, God would smell the barbecue from heaven and decide whether he liked it or not. If he liked it, then blessings would rain unto the people. If he didn't like it, there was going to be a problem. And we know there was going to be a problem because when Aaron, okay, I was going to use, that'll work. I was going to use Cain and Abel, but we can use Aaron's sons. But when Nadav and Avihu come in to bring a sacrifice to God, we don't know what they do wrong. Our Torah says they bring strange fire. Somehow they did something wrong. They didn't sacrifice it correctly. They brought a bad, we don't know. But God didn't like it. And what did God do? He incinerated them on the spot. Just zapped them. They were gone. When God doesn't like something, God can be very harsh. When Uzzah touches the ark, God zaps him and incinerates him. Which is why on Yom Kippur, when you hear the cantor sing, Vehakohanim, okay, and he reenacts what happens during the Yom Kippur time. What is that? The high priest goes into the Holy of Holies. Talmud tells us he has a rope tied around his leg. Why? Because if God doesn't like what the high priest does, God goes into the Holy of Holies, and at that time is going to pronounce God's name, Yud-He Vav-He, which we have no idea what it sounds like. It was lost when the priesthood was lost. So the high priest would go in and say that name. And then the people would anxiously wait outside to see whether it was going to be good or whether there was going to be a whole bunch of tumult in there and God was going to incinerate the high priest on the spot. If they heard all kinds of problems, they had the rope. They're going to yank him out real quick before something happens to him. So, of course, it's always good. And what happens after the high priest intones V'hakohanim? Baruch Adonai Amborach Leolam Vaed. Praise be God from his high places. It went well for us this year. Okay, we're good. We're saved another year. Okay, so we start with the idea that God is far away. We don't know anything about God. And when we get to Maimonides in terms of philosophy, we're going to find out Maimonides said, you don't know a thing about God. You can't even talk about God in a positive sentence. You can only say what he can't do. So God is far away. This is one idea. And we start with that idea. So here is a quotation from Isaiah, the prophet Isaiah. And you know what? Before I forget, I passed over it really fast. Rosie said, how did we get to God in the biblical period? Through the prophets. That is partly true. That is true. When the temple is destroyed, right, how did we access God's will? The prophets told us God's will. So that is true. That is true. When prophecy ended with Malachi, how did we access God's will? Angels. Angels brought us God's will. When the rabbis took over, how did we access God's will? The rabbis appoint themselves the interpreter of God's will. And so they inherit that tradition from the prophets, and they interpret God's will. Okay. Do we have angels before with Abraham? Yes, we do, but they're nameless angels who come to us in the form of human beings. We don't get full on, we're going to have a whole class on this. Love this section. We're going to have a whole class on this. We don't get full on angels and demons. Gabriel, Michael, Uriel, Raphael, and all the demons. Asmodeus, Satan, Samael. We don't get them until the Second Temple period, when the exiles return from Babylon, and they bring the ideas of Zoroastrian dualism with them. And so when the rabbis get a hold of that many, many years later, they freak out. It's like, oh, no. Okay, here's Isaiah. For my thoughts are not your thoughts. Neither are your ways my ways, says the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. That's Isaiah 40. So as I said, one response from us as human beings trying to figure out where God is in the face of great disaster or harm to our people is we don't know God's ways. God has his own time. We don't know God's plan. We just have to trust that God's plan has us in it for good. And that is a valid Jewish response.
In the midst of the Holocaust, how did the Jews view God?
Say again, in the midst of the Holocaust, how did Jews view God? There were many, many different ways about how Jews viewed God. We are going to have a class coming up. I have 16 classes with you, so I've got a whole class in Holocaust theology about how did the Holocaust change things. And it changed things dramatically because it brought in ideas that hadn't been accepted before. So very quickly, I mean, we had some rabbis, two especially, Bernard Mazza and another, who said, you know what, the Jews deserved it. They come on, Mark. I'm applying for Medicare this year, and I hate it. They assimilated. Thank you. They assimilated, and they lost their Judaism, and therefore they deserved it. And that was a very not okay response. That was the predominant response before the Holocaust. But then after the Holocaust, that became, oh, no, that's not going to work. And then, so we had a whole range of responses. God is dead. He doesn't care about us anymore. We have to think about God differently. We have to change the covenant. The original covenant isn't in force anymore because clearly God didn't live up to his side of the covenant during the Holocaust. So when we get to that class, we got a lot to talk about. What I was talking about, not being able to know God. Good. The very common phrase that is used today, God works in mysterious ways. Sure. Because we don't know God. Here is another quotation. This is from Job. And Job asks the sort of quintessential question about, where were you? What's going on? How come you're not, right? Can you find out the deep things about God? Can you find out the limit of the Almighty? It is higher than heaven. What can you do? Deeper than Sheol, the place of death. What can you know? Its measure is longer than the earth and broader than the sea. So this is early Job, Job 11, early in the book of Job. And so Job tells us, look, what do we know about God? We know nothing about God. And then later on, if you haven't read this, you need to read this because it's an extraordinary response from God. At the end of Job questions God and says, oh, really? Where were you? What's going on? And what does God do? God just gives it to him. And he says, excuse me, where were you when I created the earth? Where were you when I did all these things? Basically, he tells Job to shut up. And Job is like, and God really gives it to him. Hard. Out of the whirlwind, it's called. God just blasts him. Can you tell I get excited by this material? Okay. Yes. You can't.
Oh, I can't do it from there. Let me just move over here. That's okay. This has to do with science and belief in God. How do you equate the two? I wonder if you're going to talk about that in the future in terms of, especially with all the science that's coming out now regarding the cosmos and all that, and scientists say there is no God, it's just science, and there's nothing created the universe, it just came out of, it just happened. Are you going to be talking about that at all?
I wasn't really planning to. The only thing I will say is that it is well known that our biblical account of how the world happened, that out of tohu vavohu, God creates, is very similar, and many people have acknowledged this, is very similar to the idea of the Big Bang. And so one can say, wow, okay, we have a lot of correlation here. Lana.
I came to God in an anthropology class. It felt after 18 weeks of this, it was planned. So I've studied science and continued. And I've justified the correlation by simply saying the Bible tells us what God did, science fills in the details.
That science fills in the details. Okay, very nice, very nice. Let me read you some Hasidic thought. This is Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav, very, very famous Hasidic teacher. God, as is well known, is above all time. This is a truly marvelous notion, utterly incomprehensible, impossible for the human mind to grasp. You must appreciate, however, that basically time is the product of ignorance. That is to say, time only appears real to us because our intellect is so puny. The greater the mind, the smaller and less significant does time become for it. There is a mind so elevated that for it the whole of time is counted as nothing. For so great is that mind that for it the whole time span is as nothing whatever. And we see this idea very clearly in the idea that a year for what do I want to say? That time for God doesn't really exist. 10,000 years in our time is a blink of an eye for God, right? God, our time doesn't correspond to God's time. So that is one argument, right? We are left in slavery for 350 years in Egypt, right? And what does the Torah tell us? And it says that God remembered the Hebrew slaves. God remembered. That's the word, and that is the correct translation from the Hebrew. He remembered them. So the question is, what? He forgot? He forgot about us for 350 years? He just like, oh, I have some other things to do right now. I don't have time for them. And he went over here for a while, and then he came back and said, oh, the Hebrews. I gotta take a look at that again. But if we have the idea that God's time is not our time, then 350 years for God is really the blink of an eye. And he said, okay, now I need to turn my attention to the Israelites. Okay. Yes. We know that human existence is a speck of time. Absolutely. Absolutely. So now we have the idea of God being immanent. And I think we all want this idea. We want to know that when we go to sleep, when we wake up, whenever during the day, and we want to talk to God, that God's going to listen to us, that God is around us, and that he's going to hear our prayer, or she's going to hear our prayer. Let's not be crazy about this, that God is going to hear our prayer, and God's going to answer our prayer. We want to believe that. If God is way up there, unknowable, inaccessible, then God's not listening to our prayer. We don't like that. And through the course of history, other groups of Jews didn't like it either, we'll find out. So, God is immanent and accessible. He's nurturing and comforting like a parent who is near to humanity. He hears our prayers, he answers us, and he is like a personal being to us. In the ancient world, you brought your sacrifice. You were just simply one of 100 or 1,000 who brought a sacrifice. And you were hoping that God would identify that sacrifice and single you out and give you a blessing. But you were just one of a whole group of people bringing sacrifices. You didn't have access to a personal God. I know that because what did you have to do? You had to go through an intermediary. You had to go through the priests in order to get to God. You couldn't petition God on your own. It didn't work that way. You had to go through the priest to access God. And the priest would go to God for you. In the same way that if you want absolution in the Catholic Church, what do you have to do? You have to go make confession. And then who appeals to God on your behalf? The priest. That's exactly how it was. The Catholic Church is probably the closest thing we have to what the ancient temple sacrifice used to sort of, the ancient temple practices used to be. And the idea of the Eucharist, the blood and the wafer, similar kinda, sorta, to the sacrifices that were brought by the people. So, here's from Megillah 29a in the Talmud. Come and see how beloved Israel is before God. For wherever they went into exile, the Shekhinah went with them in Babylon. The Shekhinah was with them, and in the future, when Israel will be redeemed, the Shekhinah will be with them as well. So the idea that, in the first case, God is way up there, we can't access him, we don't know anything about him, he's just up there. Now, we have a quotation from the rabbis telling us that God's presence is so close to the Israelites, that God's presence is so entwined with the future of the Israelites, that when they go into exile, he goes into exile with them, because he is right there with them. That's an immanent God, a God who cares about his people and is close to them. From Psalms, thou knowest when I sit down and when I rise up. Thou discernest my thoughts from afar. Thou searchest out my path and my lying down, and art acquainted with all my ways. Oh, God knows what's in our hearts. God knows what's in our minds. God knows about us. God knows about Joette personally, and what she's thinking and what she's feeling. And Judy, what she's personally thinking and feeling, right? And Bridget, what she's personally thinking. And Warren, and Evie, and all of us. God knows each of us. Talmud has a beautiful section regarding how we take advantage of people in business and with our words. And one of the beautiful little sections, a little sugi in there, is that you go into a store and you're looking around the store. And Talmud says you should not ask the storekeeper how much a certain item is. Why? Because the storekeeper has a lot of business to do, and he's trying to make sales. I'm assuming it's a he. And if you ask and you have no intention to buy, you are just distracting him, and you are taking his attention off what he needs to do, and you are stopping him from making money. And getting his hopes up. Very good, Joette. You know this section. And you're getting his hopes up that he's going to make a sale. And so the question then becomes, well, were you kind of interested? Were you really interested? Or were you just asking to ask? And the Talmud says, God knows what your intention was when you asked. And so the idea is that, as opposed to a transcendent God, there is the idea in our tradition as well that God is very close to us, and he knows us personally. And he cares about each and every one of us individually. Judy.
So another thing you talked about last week was the different names for God. Do we refer to him differently when we talk about the close God versus the faraway God?
Good questions. Coming up. Very good question. Very good question. Okay, so let's look at the biblical period now. what was the biblical view of God? The biblical view of God was that God was transcendent. But sometimes God could be immanent at God's choosing, right? He send angels. He'll send, according to the Talmud, he'll send Gabriel to Sodom and Gomorrah to mete out the punishment. He will speak to Moses and communicate with Moses face to face. He will communicate to Abraham. I had someone in my other class ask me, did God really speak to Abraham? It's a good question. So we know God speaks to Moses. That's for sure. And God communicates to the prophets. Somehow they have a dream, or they have some kind of communication from God. God doesn't say, Isaiah, blah, 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 blah. He doesn't do that. But somehow Isaiah gets some kind of communication from God. Somehow God makes his will known to Isaiah and Ezekiel and Jeremiah and all the other prophets. What about Abraham? Because it says God speaks to Abraham. Here's my feeling. Because Abraham is in public a lot. I don't think God speaks to Abraham in a voice that other people can hear. Because if that were the case, Abraham would be there and all the people around him would be hearing God saying, Abraham, blah, 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 right? I don't think that happened. What I do think happened, and this is Rabbi Marks, what I do think happened is that God made his voice intelligible to Abraham only. So when God said, Abraham, get thee to the place that I will show you, Lech Lecha, right? Abraham heard God in his mind. I don't think God's voice rumbled through the heavens, but I think Abraham heard it. So in that way, I think God spoke to Abraham. He didn't speak to everybody else, but he spoke to Abraham. Okay. So these ideas, transcendence and immanence, as we go through Jewish history, are going to exist together. So God is mostly transcendent and sometimes immanent when God chooses. God can speak to certain people when God wants to. This is the biblical idea. Now, Judy, now I'm going to answer your question. So, biblically, what is God's name? Okay. Yod He Vav He. What does God tell Moses his name is? Eyeh Asher Eyeh. I will be what I will be. Talk about cryptic. Talk about what? You'll be what you'll be? Okay. God is far away. He's close to Moses, obviously, in that moment, but not so much to everyone else. God is a moral God, unlike the other gods of the ancient world. Remember, if you think about it, how does the Hebrew God differ from the gods of the ancient world? No blood sacrifice. The ancient gods of the other civilizations were capricious and whimsical. They were capricious and whimsical. If Zeus was having a bad day, the thunderbolts were flying. If Poseidon was having a bad day, the storms were raging. If Marduk was having a bad day, the people were suffering. It just kind of depended. The gods If they were having a good day, we're good. If we're having a bad day, we're bad. They, who were human? They seem to act in the same way that humans acted. You know, some days we have good days, some days we have bad days. When we get bad, we're angry and we take it out on whoever's in front of us, and et cetera. And so the gods, according to the other civilizations, did basically the same thing. The Hebrew God was completely different. The other gods of the other civilizations were gods of nature. The god of the sea. They were gods of nature. The Hebrew God was completely different. The Hebrew God was and is above nature. He created nature, but he's not part of it. We're going to have to talk about that when we get to Spinoza, because Spinoza is going to tell us that God is nature and nature is God, and that's on the Treifa table, even though Spinoza was Jewish. Okay. The Hebrew God was a God of just and moral behavior. The huge difference between the Hebrew God and the other gods was that you knew what to expect from Yud He Vav He. If you behaved, according to our tradition, Yud He Vav He would reward you. If you misbehaved, plan on it. You're getting punished. It's happening. And so God was a God of justice and morality. Yes, Joette.
So, in the Torah, when I don't remember which is which, but there's Adonai and Elohim, and one is justice and the other is
Good.
mercy.
Very good. So Joette says in the Torah there's Adonai, Yud He Vav He, and Elohim. And she said, I don't remember which is which, but one is justice and one is mercy. Very good. Okay, let me take a little excursus to the side. Say again. So, in the Torah, God has two different names. So, I'll explain it right now. God has two different names. The rabbis knew that this was a problem. And they said, why does God have two different names? This doesn't make sense. And I think we talked a little bit about this last week, but it's important, so it bears very quick review. So what the rabbis did was they said, you know what? God has two different names. The way we have to explain this is that God has two different major attributes. An attribute of mercy and an attribute of justice. Every time the name Adonai appears, it is during a narrative where God is administering mercy to the people. Every time where God's name is Elohim, he is administering justice to the people. Okay, that's fine. And that existed for centuries, that explanation from the rabbis, until we get to the mid to late 1800s, and Julius Wellhausen proposes the documentary hypothesis, which says that the Torah was the product of at least 3 or 4 authors, and that the Torah is really a collection of stories both from the southern kingdom Judah and the northern kingdom Israel. When the northern kingdom Israel is destroyed in 721 BCE, those stories from the northern kingdom are brought down into the southern kingdom by some of the exiles from the northern kingdom. Have I got everyone following me so far? We're good? Okay. When the Babylonians then invade and everybody who is anybody goes into exile in Babylon, all of that material is brought with them, northern stories and southern stories. And the theory is that in Babylonia, the Jewish community, the elders sat down and they said, you know, we We have all this stuff here. We may never get out of Babylon. We better put all this material together and assemble a history of our people. We may be lost to time. We may never get back to anywhere. So someone, according to Friedman, it's Ezra, cleverly edits all of the material and splices everything together. The stories from the northern kingdom and the stories from the southern kingdom, which explains why we have 2 stories about Noah. We have 2 stories about Adam and Eve. In one story, God just creates Adam and he creates Eve. In the second story, God takes the Christian translators say it's his rib. It's a terrible translation. But they take something from him and they create Eve. Those are the 2 stories, and they're completely different. For those of you who want to know, the word is Selah. Selah can mean a rib. It can. But almost everywhere that it's used in the Torah, it means side. Like when you're talking about the ark, the side of the ark is the Selah of the ark. And so, I think, and others do as well, much better translation is he took Adam's side. In other words, he made his other half, right? Because for centuries, the fact that it was translated as rib has been a way to suppress women. Oh, she was just made from his rib. Just a little part of him. She's nothing compared to him. I like much better the idea that she was made from his side, and she became an exact partner to him, equal to him in every way. I think that's a much better translation. Don't you? I mean, so he finds his other half, literally. Okay. What Wellhausen proposes is that the Torah is a product of a number of different authors and that there are 2 different sets of stories that are combined together, probably by Ezra, and then brought back after the Babylonian exiles' return in 538 BCE. And then now our Torah has 2 different stories. And subsequent scholars have shown, if you take all the stories that have Adonai and you separate them out, it's a continuous, beautiful narrative from beginning to end. Same with Elohim, a continuous, beautiful narrative from beginning to end. So this was the stories from the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. The rabbis didn't understand that, and the rabbis couldn't even entertain the thought that the Torah was not written by God. Therefore, their idea about justice and mercy was their explanation. Interesting that it kind of holds true. I mean, the northern kingdom, their stories were much more concerned with God's justice in the world, and the southern kingdom was more concerned with where God was merciful in the world. So that holds true. What? Are you kidding? Oh my God. This class goes so fast. We could go for another 4 or 5 hours. Anyway, we have to be continued next week. I love this stuff. I love this stuff.
Well, we love it.
This is.
I know. I went to different offices. I talked to Patrick, he's our facility manager, and he talked to security, and they're gonna give you a temporary pass. He said they'd give it to you next week, but if you wanna walk over there.
I'll get it next week.
I just thought of this when you said side. Maybe it was the liver, because the liver can regenerate itself. You take a piece of somebody's
That might be pretty
and do it.
sophisticated for them.
No, but maybe God already knew that, and so if you take a piece of someone's liver to transplant it, Your liver will grow back.
too,
It's the
yes.
only organ that will grow back.
Yeah.
I would like you next time to talk about the sacrifice, because you said many people brought sacrifice. How did the rabbi decide which is the sacrifice, and what happened to all the other sacrifices? I know that it said the priest. So, talk about that.
How did the rabbis decide?
Which of the animals was going to be the sacrifice?
Because Leviticus tells us which animals have to go for which sacrifices. But yeah, I'll bring that up.
Hey, Mark, thank you so much. I really love this.
Oh, great. Well, you're welcome. I mean, is it okay with that? Is it okay with me anytime?
I live in Sausalito.
Ah,
Yeah.
well, you can maybe tune in.
I was wondering, I was going to ask, can I tune in
So
online?
this is the lady you're talking to.
Excellent. Yeah. Is it Zoom or is it?
No, it's streaming.
Yeah, is it a Facebook or?
No, it's our streaming from the temple.
Yeah.
But you do need a password.
Okay. And would I get that from you?
Yeah.
Okay. Mark, this was great. I really loved it. I was writing a lot of stuff down. And
Cool.
appreciate it.
Certainly.
Take care.
Have a great week.
You too. Yeah. So how would I? Oh, I'm Lois's son-in-law. Okay. I'm fully well. Oh, does Lois have it? Oh yeah, I do.
Hi there.
Hi, I'm Paul Mallory, and I'm Lois's son-in-law.
Oh, very nice.
And yeah, I'm sitting in today.
Pastor at church, First Presbyterian Church in Sausalito.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah, nice to meet you too.
So you're visiting?
Yes.
That's what you do on vacation. You go to a tech classes in Senegal.
Well,
Yeah.
I suggested that he might enjoy coming, and he right away said, "Oh, yes, I'd love to."
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, it's great to have you.
My partner's home asleep.
That's fine. That's good. Good. So I'm the rabbi of the synagogue, Brian Schultz.
Oh, great. Nice, nice.
Yeah.
Is this a reform or
Conservative.
conservative? Okay. Okay, cool. Yeah. So glad you're doing it. It's really nice to meet you. I'm just loving this.
This is Lana. My son-in-law, Paul.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he's visiting, and
Where you visiting from?
Sausalito.
Okay.
Yeah.
Over there. On my honeymoon, we went out to yeah, on a honeymoon, we crossed the bridge and went to a kind of a bar, grill, and had dinner there. So that's
Nice.
a lot of nice residents. I have to show you this.
Yeah, I am going to grab a little.
All right, so we're going to begin in just a minute. So if everyone could finish at the snack bar and make their way to the.
All right, everyone, we're going to begin. I have no idea. I am just the teacher. I am not the organizer of this program. So I don't know the answer to your question, but it's a good one. Yeah, we can make some other suggestions. In fact, I think you're right. Okay, so we're going to begin. I think it's a good suggestion. One of the suggestions is, why are we back here? And I suspect it has something to do with the streaming, but we can actually talk about a different thing that we could do. Maybe I'll talk to you, Susie, offline. Okay. It's only loud on rainy days, but I know it's a schlep for people back here anyway sometimes. So, okay, we're going to begin. So sometimes I like seeing what Rabbi Goodman is teaching and then seeing if I could use anything that he put up on the board for my class. And so that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to give you a little background before we get into this crazy story, which is very Talmudic in that it has many kind of like false ends, digressions, and poignant points. We'll get to that in just a minute. So here's what I took. I took the liberty of drawing. By the way, I really love how they cleaned up for us here. They just leave all the schmutz out. Okay, so I have no idea what he was talking about, but what I would say is when I looked at what Rabbi Goodman was teaching over here, this is the biblical notion of God. Close, accessible, the Shekhinah. You can make korbanot to get close. Korban actually literally means in Hebrew close. Comes to the Hebrew word karov, close. So you get close to God by making a korban, by making a sacrifice. So all of this is very biblical. In the Bible, God is close. You have God in the beginning of the Bible coming down, in the Garden of Eden saying, hey, what's going on? And you have God very involved with Abraham, sending messengers. At some points, God takes the place of the messenger takes the place of God. You have lots of God presence in the Bible. Then, of course, it seems to step back a little bit, but still God is pretty present. The pinnacle, of course, of God's presence is God's revelation, the theophany at Mount Sinai, where God reveals God's self to an entire nation. From that moment on, though, God takes a step back in the Bible. God steps back from the God of all, I'm going to reveal myself through a nation, and God says, I'm going to work through one person. I'm going to work through a prophet that's going to reveal my will. It starts out with Moses. That's to the end of the Torah. Then Moses to Joshua, and then down the line, and we're off and running. But what happens as the Bible continues and God becomes less and less? What happens when God becomes inaccessible or unknowable or far away? Like in a few weeks, we're going to read from the book of Esther, which is a product of the diaspora, but nevertheless, God's not even mentioned. In other words, in the Hebrew Bible, you see God kind of doing a dance. God's like stepping in, and then stepping out. Now, Christianity, we have a gentleman here, Paul? Yeah. Paul, who's a preacher. Christianity has a particular theological suggestion to what happens to this dance. And Judaism has a different move. And in a way, this kind of is a synopsis of both of our faiths. If this is the world, in the Bible, it's God getting really close, and then God stepped, like Mount Sinai, right? Theophany at Mount Sinai, 10 Commandments. God revealing God's self to an entire nation of people. I mean, think about that. It's a bold theological claim. God's going to reveal God's self to 600,000. That's obviously it's an exaggeration, but in the text itself, 600,000 people are going to get a revelation from God direct. But then back. Then the question arises, when the world starts falling apart, what do? In other words, as God becomes less and less accessible, and for the Jews it's punctuated, of course, by the destruction of the Second Temple, where you can't make a korban, a closeness offering. You can't get close to God, karov, but rather God is inaccessible, far away, and unknowable. The mystery of God is not realizable. So Christianity makes this move. Christianity says God returns and steps back in. In other words, so for Christianity, the dance goes like this. That's Jesus. And there's a beauty to that, absolutely, right? And, Paul can talk about that, when it's not his 45-minute class. But you go to Sausalito, you can hear him talk about this, about the beauty of the return hug, right? There's certain beauty about that, to feel the knowability or the accessibility or God's presence in life again. And hearing from people about being saved or feeling Jesus in their life, like some of those stories are beautiful and very compelling. It's not the Jewish way. It's the Christian way. So again, Christianity, God steps back, God steps back in. And that's what you see with the offering in Christianity of God's only Son. I mean, that's a big investment. That's a big step back in, right? That's a big, like putting all your chips on the table, back on in. Now, Judaism says, no. God being out here, as the Hebrew Bible leads us, is actually kind of like here. I'll give you, I'll tell you what's happening. In less than a week, in 4 days, my son is going to Israel. My 10th grader is going to Israel for 3 months, right? He's going to Israel for 3 months. The last quarter of the academic year at Milken Community School, he's part of a program that's taking him to Israel now he's gone to summer camp for a month. Summer camp's kind of like summer camp though, right? You can't leave the camp. Like everything is, you just throw the kid on the bus and stick him in the shower when they get back, right? Like, and you throw all the clothes out. But this is different. I got to get like a phone for him, extra health insurance. I got to explain to him the differences between the electrical systems. Like you can't plug in your Apple computer, you'll roast it, and this and that, and the money, and going to the drugstore, and what you have to do, and this and that, and life in Israel. Oh, and you can go out on that one, and this one and that one. Like it is. It's an enormous step back for me as a parent. And while I'm nervous staying back here, my hope is that this is not the world anymore, this is now my son. What do I hope that he's going to be able to do? Function on his own, survive, maybe even thrive. That it's my hope that he is going to be able to stand on his own 2 feet and walk, right? Like a little baby that you eventually, like you're holding, and then you kind of let go, and they do like the drunken baby dance, right? And then all of a sudden they're up and they're walking, then they're running, then they fall, and they get back up again, and they run more. Judaism is about this. About, okay, we believe that God takes a step back, and it's our responsibility, like my son, to walk on our own. And of course, there are going to be stumbles. Of course, there are going to be times when we and we can all have good debates about when those times occur. But Judaism, ultimately, the difference between biblical Judaism and rabbinic Judaism is rabbinic Judaism is an investment in human agency, as opposed to biblical Judaism, which is the agenda. It's an investment in the introduction of God to the world. The Bible is introduction of God to the world. And then after the introduction and the big hug at Mount Sinai, it's a step back. Christianity says, okay, what's Act 2? Act 2 is a failure of humanity. So the reintroduction of a God, a deity, Jesus, hug again. That's how God responds. And in Judaism, Act 2 is God saying, like, I'm, putting my kid on a plane and saying, go to Israel and figure it out. That's what it is. It's an investment in human agency. So, after the destruction, so I just like looking at, this has nothing to do with what I wanted to talk about. This is Rabbi Goodman's stuff. By the way, I have no idea what he talked about. I just looked at the board. I just took his board, then I just started adding stuff. So, yes, then I crossed this out. So basically, you have a close God. Close, accessible. You get close, karov. As the Bible continues, I wrote this in, you get less and less. It leads to a transcendent, far away, unknowable God. What do we do in that case? So what do we do? Then I crossed this part out because it didn't fit what I was going to say. I don't know why you wrote it here. This is the Bible. That goes over there as far as I'm concerned. But this is rabbinic authority. So in other words, it's an investment in human agency. Now, that's all a segue into a 20-minute segue. Any questions about that? And we'll get to my story. Questions about that? Comments? Okay. All right. So, as the Jews, I'll go back to this in a second. We pass these around. Everyone make sure they have one. So this one. There. Okay. As the Jews go into a new reality, as the Jews face a new reality, that is with we have to do better for you guys. Like I feel like this class is like smushed in, and like let me talk to you after, Susie. Like we should get this room set up nicer for you guys. Like schmutz all over the place. Like we got to do a little bit better. Okay. It's like there's no room here because of the group that came in the morning. Like we can just put, which is great that they're here, but we should clean this up for you guys so it's. We'll talk about it next time. We'll talk. Well, you and I will converse, okay? Anyway, so after God, the destruction of the second temple, there's no more korbanot. There's no more sacrifices. No place to do it. You're only supposed to, according to the book of Deuteronomy, do it in one place. That one place is destroyed. You can't do it anymore. And so that leads to, again, the question of what do we do? And there is the emergence of rabbinic authority. Now, when rabbinic authority emerges, it's not an easy emergence. It's not an easy, and this is also one of the different, so you think about the Talmud, and I'm doing a lot of comparative religion today because Paul's here. The Talmud, in some ways, parallels what Christians would call the New Testament. We obviously don't call it the New Testament, right? Because no one wants, I show my kids the new iPhone or the old iPhone. You know which one they're going with, right? so there's a supersessionist kind of idea that the new has replaced the old. And so as the New Testament, or the Gospels as we would call them, are being written, simultaneously, at least contemporaneously, not simultaneously, but in the same period, the Jews are, rabbinic authority is emerging. Now, a difference between the rabbinic teachings, which are codified in the Talmud, the earliest rabbis, which are codified in the Talmud, and the teachings of the Gospels, the Gospels are a lot smoother. Smoother, a lot like very, it's just like, look, it's a big hug from God. And the Talmud is a lot sloppier and a lot more turns and a lot of going on, right? The Talmud is a discussion, an enormous discussion, and figuring out a process of what to do when God is transcendent, far away. I don't know if I want to say unknowable. I'll just go with transcendent and far away. In other words, when you step back, when God steps back and we now are left here, how do we stand up on our 2 feet? And as I'm sure my son in Israel next week, you'll ask me how it's going next week, is going to teeter and need to figure things out. And there's going to be some times when it's going to be, whoa, and there's going to be he'll meet someone and maybe a little bit of this and a little of that. Maybe I'll get a little, and maybe, he'll spend too much money and I'll have to call me up, and the credit card, and he thought I wouldn't mind if he went to the bar on Shabbat with his friends, and I would, he's not going to a bar. Actually, this kid could go to a bar a little bit more. He's he's a rule follower. I kind of want him to he could break a rule or two. It would be okay. But anyway, it's sort of he's going to figure things out, and he's going to do it differently, because this is the first time when he's got to figure things out on his own. Okay? It's going to be sloppy. No, he's been to Israel before. So anyway, he's going to figure things out, and it's going to be a little sloppy. The Talmud is kind of analogous to that. The Talmud is us as Jews figuring it out. And it's sloppy, and it's not systematic, and it reads more of like a telephone conversation between friends than a systematic. The Talmud is not a book of Jewish law. That is not the Talmud. The Talmud is not very prim and proper. Do these prayers at this hour of the night. Let us move to the next subject. Please do not eat any pig. Do not eat cheeseburgers. Please learn Hebrew. That's not the Talmud. The Talmud is elbows are out. It is sharp. It is you got to be in there to you've got to hands up. You've got to be sharp with your intellect, and you can't blush. It's not prudish at all. That's the Talmud. So, yes, Bridget. Oh, don't worry about my son. I'm just using him as an analogy. Yes, he does. He has a bunch of adults. The truth of the matter is, he's the one. But personal. And I know where his grandparents may be watching this. But Harvey and Maris, do they still come on? No, they came on last year. Okay, so he's the one. So we have 3 boys. You all know that, right? And we have 3 boys. So he's the oldest, and then his brother and his 2 brothers. So he's the one who will when my wife often works late, Deborah, she'll work late, and so I'll be home with them, and he'll walk in, he'll go, I can't believe how immature you're getting with them, meaning the other 2. He's like, I've had enough, and he'll go to his room, and that's the older child. But he's a good kid. He thinks I can grow up a little bit. So I'm not worried about the adults in his life. I'm okay with him having a little bit more he's a little too strict with himself. But he's got to figure that out. Okay. So I want to show you one of those nasty kind of like stories about authority and about dignity, human dignity. And the story takes a lot of weird turns. It's a story from the Talmud, from Masechet Brachot, which is, Brachot means blessings, but like the Talmud, it doesn't stay with blessings. Like it goes all over the place. And so what I want to do is I want to first of all apologize to a guy who's easy to read as the bad guy of this story. His name is Rabban Gamliel. And Rabban Gamliel, Nadia, you have something. Go ahead. It's become an open mic.
Sorry, it will be quick. In comparison of Judaism and Christianity, that there are big part of Judaism, I mean Orthodox Judaism, where they feel God being very close to them, not being transcendent only. That he can be also approachable.
Okay, so what I want to say is yes, but no to you. Yes, I understand what you mean by that when someone says, like, oh yeah, but what I mean by that, Nadia, is nobody in a Young Israel or Chabad or will say God like took a human form and showed me what to do, right? They may say, I prayed to God and I got what I wanted. Parenthetically, that's not my theology, and we could talk about that another day. I don't believe in a God like that, but it's like, I'm going to take a digression. This whole class is going to be a digression, and then maybe we'll come to the story another time. It's like I spent a lot of time living in Israel during the Second Intifada. And it was a tough time. And a lot, just bad things were happening. It was really difficult. And the morning after a pigua, after a terrorist attack, very often there'd be someone would get on the TV and say, oh, I'm here, I want to there were like 30 people killed in a bus bombing. The whatever bus gets blown up. And then they're like, okay, I'd like to today interview Shlomo. Shlomo goes on that bus every day. But the day of the attack, Shlomo got into a fight with his wife. And the fight was a rager. And he missed the bus. And Shlomo goes, it must have been God that prevented me from getting on that bus. And my response to Shlomo, with all due respect, is, oh, really? So God intervened with you, but what about the 30 people who died on the bus? Right? No intervention for them? For Shlomo, I don't believe in an interventionist God. I don't believe that God dictates the trajectory of bullets for would-be political candidates. I don't believe that, say what you will about various political agendas, but I don't believe any political leader from the left or the right is designated as a godly, God saves anybody. Joe Biden, Donald Trump, Barack Obama, Bill Clinton, JFK, George Washington, Abraham Lincoln. The reason that they are president is because we voted for them to be president. Not because, like it or not with any result that we have, but not because a God changed the trajectory of a bullet. Because if God changed a trajectory of a bullet, Like, there's a lot of stuff. Like, I don't understand why there's suffering in Africa. I don't understand why kids get cancer. I don't understand. There's a lot of other stuff that say, like, really, God? Like, you know, or like this happens during the Super Bowl. You know, some athlete makes a catch. One of my favorite catches ever. Boy, I'm really going to go on the side over here. One of my favorite catches ever. And he made a video for me, this guy. It was really nice. He's a sweet man. His name is David Tyree. Anyone know who David Tyree is? No, of course you don't know who David Tyree is, because except for one moment, brief moment in time, he was completely unmemorable. He was a very fringe player for the New York Giants 2008 team, right? And he was like happy to be in the NFL. Very sweet man, very religious, very... Anyway, David Tyree, legend has it, like he was like the backup's backup, right? He was like the backup of the backups. He's like one step above Waterboy, right? Like he's like, if the luggage weighs too much, he stays home on the road trips. Anyway, David Tyree is, the legend goes, during the Giants, who are a mediocre team that somehow make it to the Super Bowl. They get close enough to win. They get through a few playoff games, and then they have to. I'll tell you exactly who they beat. They beat the Dallas. They beat the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in Tampa. Then they went on the road and they beat the Dallas Cowboys. I hate the Cowboys in Dallas. Then they beat the Green Bay Packers They beat the Green Bay Packers in Green Bay, freezing temperature. Okay, they win all those games. Then, after winning those 3 games, Buccaneers okay. No one thought they'd beat the Cowboys. No one thought they'd beat the Packers. Everyone, including me, is like, nice run. We have a very nice run. We get to the Super Bowl where we will have the privilege of getting our butts kicked by Tom Brady and the New England Patriots, who are undefeated and some call the best football team ever assembled. So they're playing the New England Patriots, where they are just sort of happy to be there, happy to be in the game, not expected to win by anybody. They're playing the game, and it's close. And then the fourth quarter comes in, it's really close. And we're thinking, wait a second, maybe this could happen. Like, we don't want to, like... Anyway, it's late in the game. The ball is snapped. Eli Manning gets the ball. He goes back. He scrambles. He's getting, like, shellacked by everyone. He's getting hit left. He's getting hit right. He, like, runs away. He, like, guy has him. He tears himself away from the guy's grip, this monster of a guy, and he throws the ball just up in the air. The ball goes straight up. Now, usually in football, there's a rule. You don't heave the ball up into the middle of the field. That often results in an interception. You don't throw it up into the middle of the field. That's not a good idea. Somehow, though, he throws it up. There's like 3 guys around who jump up, one of whom is David Tyree, the guy who's the backup's backup, the guy who would be left home if the luggage got too heavy on the plane, the guy who that week of the practice they said couldn't hit, whatever. He didn't make one catch. I was trying to think of something cute to say there. He was terrible. David Tyree jumps up, puts up both of his hands, but the ball does not go into both of his hands. The ball goes in between one hand and his helmet, and he catches the ball in between his hand and his helmet, like that, and falls backward and lands, and somehow the ball does not come out. Lois, we're going to get to that. It was considered, he wrote a book, David Tyree, something called like The Greatest Catch. It's considered by when like the Super Bowl, like the week of the Super Bowl, all you see is like Super Bowl stuff, and ESPN, the sports show, just shows all this kind of stuff. It's considered like the greatest catch of football history. This underdog team like the quarterback throws it up to the guy who never caught another pass in football again, by the way. And he doesn't even catch it the right way. He catches it in between his helmet. It's called the helmet catch. And one hand, and fell backwards, and somehow the ball didn't fall out. And then the next play, or the next two plays, the Giants score a touchdown because the helmet catch put them right in position. Giants score a touchdown, they win the game. They beat the best team. They spoiled the New England Patriots, who were supposed to be the best team ever. The only team that was good, that was undefeated, I think, was the '72 Dolphins, right, with Larry Zonka at running back. But anyway, they win the game. They win the Super Bowl. And David Tyree, I guess if you were to ask David Tyree how he made the catch, he'd have one word for an answer: God. And I would have one word for the answer too: luck. Right? So I don't believe that God intervenes in football games. I don't believe that God intervenes in elections. I don't believe that God intervenes. I believe in human agency. You are right. There are some people who pray, and when they get a result that is likable to them, they say, hey, God answered my prayers. And when they get a result that's unlikable to them, they say, hey, let's check the mezuzahs. They must not be kosher. Has anyone ever heard that before? Boy, I'm really on a digression. The whole class is a digression today. This is like a walking Talmud class. So this is now more serious, so I'm going to sit down because it's not as joking as like the David Tyree. By the way, David Tyree, we have this, Super Bowl Shabbat. We do that shticky Super Bowl Shabbat. Some of you have come. You should all come to Super Bowl Shabbat. It's on Saturday mornings, the week before the Super Bowl. I make a biblically inspired, prophetic declaration of who is going to win the Super Bowl, which I got wrong 2 years in a row. So actually, it's very consistent. That's what Jews believe in prophecy. It doesn't exist anymore. Like, I look at the verses and I count gematria, all the meanings of the text. I put them all together and I guess. Actually, here's how I guess. I'll give you my secret formula. It'll now be on tape. If the Eagles are playing, I will never, ever pick the Eagles. Ever. Because I hate the Eagles. And the Eagles have our best player, Saquon Barkley. So I'm never going to root for the Eagles. So anyway, that's an aside. So anyway, I do all this shtick about it. For the first Super Bowl Shabbat, we wanted here at the synagogue, the kids, we thought it would be funny because the kids come for this too. Like the 6th grade boys kind of dig this, maybe a little bit more than MID does. And so the 6th grade boys that come in, so we go on this website. I forgot what the website's called, where you can like hire people to make like a personal video for you. Does anyone remember what that video, what is that called? There's some video, what is it called? I don't know what it's called. Oh, Cameo maybe. Cameo? That could be wrong. I don't know. None of this is worth any money. You shouldn't even buy any of it. But we bought one that was David Tyree of Super Bowl helmet catch fame. He makes a video for us because he knows in the office, they told him I'm a big Giants fan. So David Tyree gets on the little video. And he's like, Rabbi Schuldenfrei, you are going to feel the presence of God at Super Bowl Shabbat, And he goes, at the end of the video, he's going on and on because he's a religious guy, and it's great. And he has a big smile. He's a warm, really great, a super guy, like a kind of guy you want to hang out with. And he has this big smile on his face, and he goes, and at the end of the day, go Big Blue. That's the name of the Giants, Big Blue. He goes, go Big Blue, because with God on our side, nobody could defeat us. And it was so sweet, but actually, God is not on the Giants' side. I know God's not on the Giants' side because the Giants are terrible. But even if the Giants were great, God is not on the. I'd prefer, even a big football fan like myself, I want God to do other things and get involved in football games, political elections, or anything like that. And so people, Nadia, to your point about sometimes people feel God's presence. You're right. Like when people are expecting God's presence as a result of their prayers, and then the prayer doesn't come to fruition or the result that's desired, that leaves them in a little bit of a scramble. So Orthodox Jews will sometimes say, like, I'll give you an example. It's for me, it's sad. Like if a woman has a miscarriage, they'll say, check the mezuzahs. What I mean by that is inside the bayit, the decorative housing of a mezuzah. Mezuzah actually literally means door frame. That's what it means in the Bible, but then became known as the thing that we attach to, that we adorn to the amulet, so to speak. I don't know if amulet's the right word here, to the door frame. Now, inside the bayit, inside the decorative house that you can go buy at, like, the David's Judaica over there or whatever, is a scroll. And this scroll is just like a Torah scroll. It's written, by hand. It's on parchment. It degrades over time. The ink can disappear. And so what some people would say is, why did the miscarriage happen? Check your mezuzahs. Maybe the mezuzahs were no longer kosher. In other words, maybe the material or the print had degraded. But I don't believe in like a calculus that conforms like this idea of like religious life is the equivalent of efficacy of prayers. I just don't believe in that. And so I do pray, but I pray for different reasons. I actually pray more, and it's a bit of a read to do this, right? Like if you look at our prayers are kind of asking for God's, but I look at our prayers more as looking in the mirror, right? Like I look at our prayers as an opportunity for me to, I look at our prayers as being reflexive. Like, how do I do a better job by working on attributes that I can control to get a result that I am hopeful of? I don't look at prayer as I'm not looking for an interventionist God in my prayers. Now, the rabbis of the Talmud were a little bit more, but the rabbis didn't believe in the intervention of God at this point on a grand level. In other words, they didn't believe in prophecy. They believed that they needed to come up with a legal system and Jewish legal practices that would work for the entire community. And they recognized that they needed to forge ahead through their own process. And that's like the process of the early rabbis and the Sanhedrin. And what I would say is, and we'll get to this next time, is that as a result of the early rabbis who are trying to establish what normative Judaism looks like after this is messy. And this is a story of how messy it gets as Rabban Gamliel, we won't read it today, Rabban Gamliel attempts to centralize. Rabban Gamliel is Hillel's great-great-grandson. So you guys know Hillel? He's like rabbinic royalty. This is his great-great-grandson. This is after the fall of the Second Temple. They are now in Yavna, in the coastal city of Yavna, sort of trying to get out of the way of the Roman Empire and to recalibrate what is going to be rabbinic Judaism. And they got to figure out what is going to be normative Judaism. And the question arises that, and then I'll open it up for questions. The question, and this is all a prelude to next week's class. The question arises, we understand why the prayers in the morning and the afternoon, but do we have to pray for the evening prayer? Not everyone agrees that Mariv, or the evening prayer, is obligatory. And there's a difference in opinion between Rabban Gamliel, who says it's obligatory, and Rabbi Yoshua, who says it is optional. And this is the story that transpires with Rabban Gamliel, who's the Nasi, or is the head of the Jewish community, of how he establishes his authority with a diversity of opinion. And it's sometimes how he transgresses human dignity and how the rabbis all deal with that. So it's kind of like this great story. It's a very famous rabbinic story that we can get to for next time. But any now questions, comments, declarations, or confessions? Yep. Yeah, we can collect these too. We'll save them for next week. But Bridget, you have a question. I'll repeat the question for those online. Yeah. Right, that's a good point. Yeah, that's a much more sophisticated way of looking at it than I have. Yes, so I'll repeat what Bridget said. So Bridget said, wait a second. If I'm not praying for a result, but I'm just praying for God's presence, isn't that still an immanent God instead of a transcendent God? And that's a beautiful way of looking at it. Yeah, I would say that you can be surrounded by godliness, like love is godliness, a hug is godly. Like this is what the story that I tell preschoolers. It's like, I use this same story all the time. It's like, where do you find God? So there's like a detective, I give the little puppets, a detective who's looking for God, right? And God, they look under the table, the detective can't find God, and they look in the closet and they can't find God, and they look under the, behind the TV, they can't find God, and running around, and the detective gets very sad and starts to cry. And then the detective, who's a puppet, right, gets a hug. And then the question is, the detective says, oh, I found God. And where is God? God is right now. In other words, in the warm embrace of the hug, that's the presence of God. So it's not God is now, as opposed to God is there or here, right? So that's how I kind of teach about God. I think you can feel the presence of godliness around you when you pray. I just don't believe again in a God that kind of directs football games or political elections. Okay. Any other thoughts coming here, Paul? Go ahead.
I'm with that. I really connect to what you're saying, and I wonder also. I've always been moved by Joseph when he reveals himself to his brothers, and after they've come to Pharaoh's court, and they're like, oh my gosh, kill us. You're gonna, we're really in trouble now. And he says, no, I love you. Who am I? I'm not God. I don't judge you. And what you intended for evil, God has used for good. And I just wonder, not so much what this would say about God, however, what it says to Joseph, who had a pretty horrid life, and how he, by turning that, I'm going to say, his perspective over to God, redeems his own suffering in a way, just psychologically.
So psychologically, Paul makes a good point. He looks at the Joseph story and he says, look how beautiful that story is. Here is Joseph, who is sold into slavery by his brothers. And he is, mistreated. First of all, but Joseph starts off, he's a bit of a brat. So he kind of has it coming to him. Not that, but, a little Zetz wouldn't have been the worst thing. But selling him into slavery and, Potiphar's house and jail and it's not great. And he gets a reunion with his brothers, and when his brothers encounter him again, his brother thinks he's going to give it to us. He's going to get revenge here. And Joseph says no. Joseph says no. We could find the direct quote. Essentially, Joseph says, you did this, but it was God's will, kind of. I was you did what you did in order to get me here so I could be of service to the world. And the beauty of that is that Joseph is able to let go of a lot of anger, right? He's able to he doesn't lash out against it. He's the second most powerful person in the world. He's like, in the Star Wars realm, you have Darth Sidious and then Darth Vader. He's the Darth Vader of the Egypt Empire of the time. He is able to do what he wants, and dispensing with a bunch of shepherd Israelites would not have been beyond his authority. He could have given them a long, painful death, but he doesn't. So much so that even after Jacob dies, the brothers still suspect in the Torah that Joseph is only being nice to them because the father, Jacob, is still alive. And when Jacob finally dies, like 17 years, I think, after they are together in Egypt, they start biting their fingernails with concern. And they again approach Joseph and are like, hey, are we sure? Bygones, bygones, / they're thinking, uh-oh, we're in big trouble. But Joseph again doesn't try and exact revenge because he really believes that he's in this place. Now, there's a certain beauty to that story. My question then, Paul, is like what about, does that mean like the peasant boy in sub-Saharan Africa who dies of dysentery when he's 2, that was God's plan for him?
Yeah, and I don't think that's why I say I don't know that it tells us about God as much as Joseph, by taking that perspective,
Yeah.
assigning it to God,
Yeah.
allows himself to be,
Yeah.
to give meaning to that suffering.
You know what? It's actually that's why Christians don't suffer from acute anxiety like Jews. You're right. Because Christians, it's much more of like a spiritual balm. It's sort of like, it's like David Tyree. Like David Tyree is like the football catch guy. He's like the happiest guy. He actually was just the victim of a terrible fraud. Like someone took his money and I don't remember the details of it, but this football player, like this legend, for one play. Often I will meet Christians who have sort of, it's all in God's hands, and there is something very, like we talked about AA, that kind of finds itself through in AA, that by proclaiming by saying you don't have control, it gives a spiritual ease, right? Like, why worry about it when you have no control over it? Or why worry about it if the outcome is already kind of orchestrated? And so that is spiritually relaxing and beautiful. And Jews were like, wait, we have free will, and so let's worry about it and give ourselves stomach ulcers before the anti-Semites come and get us. So that's kind of where we are. That's why we needed to invent psychotherapy, so all of our kids could go to therapists and get prescribed medication. And so we don't control the media, we control the prescription drug market, not as suppliers, but as consumers of all psychotherapeutic narcotics. Anyway, I probably shouldn't say this stuff on recorded on tape, but so yeah, Christians, and that's the difference. You look at the Talmud. The Talmud it has a lot of anxiety. That's why Jews are good novelists, right? Because they tell crazy, Christians, you get a little Jewish anxiety and they become better authors. Less secure, but and less happy. But anyway, that is, you make a good point. Okay, so we talked about nothing today. This is like Seinfeld. But now I don't have to prepare for next week because I got a whole story. All right. Yeah, this is all a prelude for next week. Okay. So everyone, have a wonderful week. Paula, it was nice meeting you. It was a pleasure having you here. And Zagazont to everyone. Have a great week. Does anyone need help getting to their car? Because it's a little slippery outside with the water. Just Sue, are you okay? Oh, okay. All right, good. All right. All right.
There's excuse me, a group of old people like me to join. I need to join something.
Okay, it's called Hi Neighbors. I'm going to have them call you. Okay?
Yeah.
Sure.
Why was he in the game if it was supposed to be?